again. There's still some questions left over from earlier today, so tonight I'll just continue with those. So another question from Singapore is, what are the causes and conditions for samadhi? Well, what is samadhi? Sometimes it's translated as firmness of mind. Sometimes unification of mind, one-pointedness of mind, stillness. So obviously it's something that arises as a result of practice, training in a certain way. But then what the Buddha taught is samma samadhi, what we call right samadhi. And if you read, say, the sutta on samma samadhi and descriptions of the Noble Eightfold Path and so on, well, that consists of what we call the 4 jhanas. Jhanas, the states of stillness, one-pointedness, of increasing refinement from first through to fourth, which is characterized by purity of mindfulness and equanimity. And so samadhi is developed by relinquishing hindrances, the obstacles to the mind becoming still one-pointed. And that comes through effort. And relinquishing that which is coarser, even piti and sukha, sort of these aspects of samadhi, the bliss, the happiness, eventually are abandoned in 4th jhana for one-pointedness, stillness of equanimity, complete state of cool knowing of the mind itself. But one thing to remember is samma samadhi is practiced in conjunction with the other 7 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. So it's also linked to samma ditthi, which is, you could say, the wisdom faculty, as is samma sankappa, the faculty of right intention, and then sila, right livelihood, right action, right speech, and then samma vayama, the effort to abandon the unwholesome, to cultivate the wholesome, and samma sati, right mindfulness. These are all part of samma samadhi. So samadhi, in the way the Buddha taught, is purified, say, by sila. Because of course, every part of that Noble Eightfold Path has its opposite, in the sense you have samma samadhi, you also have miccha samadhi. So miccha samadhi, miccha means wrong or going in the wrong direction. Samma means correct, correct as in helping to purify the mind from delusion and abandoning the defilements of greed, anger and delusion. Miccha samadhi is promoting defilement, has defilement as its underlying intention and is actually increasing defilement. So what's an example of miccha samadhi? Well, somebody who trains their mind but for, you might say, for evil or unwholesome purposes. So somebody who might be training their mind in a technique of concentration, developing one pointedness, but to get at somebody else. So that may be different kinds of practices we call dhirachana, vichara, like putting spells on others, hypnotizing others, so you can, control other people. Whatever more unwholesome way you might use the mind to get the better of other people through greed or anger. Maybe even, it might be used by people when they're fighting a war to try and control the enemy or know the secrets of the enemy so that they can win, kill the enemy. Another example of miccha samadhi is a story I sometimes tell of two monks who were practicing samadhi, developing the fire kasina, but they weren't developing the whole path there. They didn't have right view, they didn't have sila, so they were using their practice of development of samadhi to compete with each other to see who has the strongest, best samadhi. And then they would have competitions to see who could out-samadhi the other guy. They would use their fire kasina, focusing on the fire element, until one was focusing on the other monk, obviously with a certain sense of self and desire to defeat the other one. He actually gave him a chest pain, and the guy had to go to hospital. So, we have miccha ditthi and samma ditthi, miccha samadhi, miccha and samma samadhi. It means training the mind to one point, the mind, to bring it to stillness, beyond the 5 hindrances. And from the text, there's 40 meditation objects. So, for example, the 10 recollections, including Buddha-anusati, so it's a very common one. Concentrating the mind on the word Buddho, or any aspect of the qualities, recollecting the qualities of the Buddha. So that might include also reciting the chant like Itipiso Bhagava Arahang Samma. But also Dhammanusati, Sanghanusati, Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of the in and out breath. And then things like the 10 asupa meditations, corpse meditations, kasinas, focusing on discs of light, different coloured light. One meditation is ahare patigula sanya, focusing the mind on the unattractiveness of food. That quality of the unattractiveness of food, as opposed to the attractiveness of food, which promotes greed and attachment. So there's a number of different meditations one can use, and it's about cultivating effort backed by sila, and then right effort, persistent effort. Right effort includes persistence, to keep at it, not give up. So Ajahn Chah used to give the story of the guy who wants samadhi, but he does a little bit and then he gets tired, so he stops, does other things, and then he goes back and does a bit more meditation, and he stops, maybe has a nap, maybe talks to his friend, maybe goes away. If it was nowadays, he'd go away and look at his mobile phone for a while. And so he never gets samadhi, because he's always stopping and doing other things. It's not persistent effort. Ajahn Chah compared it to the guy who wants fire from sticks. In the old days, said rub sticks to get fire. As you rub sticks together, you get friction, heat. Eventually, they're so hot they can spark dry grass or leaves. But this guy is rubbing two sticks together to get the heat, to get the spark, to get fire, but his wrists, his arms get tired rubbing, so he puts the sticks down, has a rest, does something else. When his hands and arms feel better, then he picks the sticks up again. But of course, every time you put the sticks down, they go cold, they lose the heat, and then you're starting from scratch. So he never gets a spark, he never gets fire. And if we're honest, a lot of our practice is like that. We do some good practice, and then we stop. And we do later, when we remember, we do a bit more, and then we stop. So Ajahn Chah would say, you do your hours meditation and you really put effort in, and that's good. And you may get some calm, one-pointedness, but then you go away and you talk to your friend for 2 hours. So it's like all the samadhi and the one-pointedness and the mindfulness drains away. So it's this persistent effort, perseverance, keeping at it, that is probably an essential cause for samadhi to arise. Sila as well, living and acting in a way that supports the training of the mind in samadhi. So if you're doing a lot of things that really distract your mind and encourage the hindrances, things, things that make you get angry, get full of desire. If you eat too much food, so you're falling asleep. If you're always worrying about things, you're too busy with work, worrying about money and work and so on. Maybe you have to streamline your lifestyle, the way you do things, what you're doing, in order to support the practice of meditation. So lifestyle, you might say, the refined aspect of sila, not just keeping the 5 precepts, but also how you spend your time and the kind of activities you're involved with, is part of the training in samadhi, because you could be doing things that are just counterproductive. And you spend your time, you do your half an hour, your 1 hour meditation practice every day, but other times you're doing all kinds of things that are really filling your mind with a lot of negativity or mental proliferation, confusion, distraction. So lifestyle, sila, is one aspect that will support samadhi. Persistent effort, perseverance is another. Another more refined aspect is a meditation, using a meditation object that suits you. So we usually teach mindfulness of breathing, anapanasati, as a kind of universal object that for most people is a very good one. But there are other objects. As I said earlier, recollection of the Buddha is also a very popular one. Usually for people with faith, strong faith in the Buddha. So they like to recite Buddho, 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 and they quickly become content reciting that out of their faith in the Buddha. Brings up the right state of mind, the right attitude. But mindfulness of breathing is also a very popular meditation object, and it obviously calms the mind. Some people use other objects, so recollection of death. People find quite helpful in the beginning of their practice because we're always thinking about the future and what we want to do and what we want to get and have, and which stirs the mind up. So when you recollect death, it really brings your mind to the present moment and cuts through a lot of our planning and scheming. So many monks I know have practiced recollection of death as a way to calm their mind in the beginning, and maybe later they move on to practicing mindfulness of breathing. A much smaller number of practitioners use the meditation object of asupagamatana, contemplation of the body, one aspect of the unattractiveness of the body, going through the 32 parts, or even seeing your body as a corpse. That's for a minority to start with. Maybe later, if you practice with another meditation object first, then you go on to contemplation of the body when you're calm. It might be more practical. But some people, they start off with contemplation of the body or the corpse meditation and they quickly get results and samadhi arises. So I know a few monks who have done that and straight away they get a state of one-pointedness by developing the perception of the unattractiveness of the body. Then there's the 4 Brahma Viharas as well. Kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity. So there's a whole variety of meditation objects. And sometimes a teacher can help guide you what the best meditation object to start with is. And one final kind of factor for samadhi is wisdom. And you might have heard this phrase, wisdom develops samadhi. And sometimes some people's character, they actually begin, you might say, with the practice of vipassana straight away as they're meditating, contemplating and reflecting on impermanence of body, feelings, sensations, thoughts arising, passing away. And through doing that, their mind starts to let go of hindrances, settle down into a state of one-pointedness. So they call that wisdom developing samadhi. And even if you're practicing with a more straightforward object, such as mindfulness of breathing, you'll always need some wisdom. You need to reflect on what you're doing, the kind of effort you're putting in, whether you're doing too much, too little. Too much effort is often associated with the desire for results. But then we try too hard, we're too greedy for results. And the mind doesn't actually settle down because we're forcing it, or there's too much willpower involved. And then the other extreme is, not trying hard enough. Want the easy way to nibbana. They want to be able to just sit there and let the mind wander all over the place, but not discipline it at all, not bring up mindfulness of the object, but just let the mind wander or fall asleep, and maybe just go for ticking a box. I did my hours meditation, I've ticked the box, but actually there was no quality to the meditation. So reflecting on the kind of effort, the quality of effort, the object you're using, and also just particular hindrances that come up, you also need to use some wisdom and reflection to deal with them sometimes, to know how to adjust your meditation to deal with a particular problem. A lot of wisdom comes through listening to the Dhamma, getting ideas. Other wisdom comes through your own experience, just reflecting back on what you've done and seeing what works, what doesn't work. And most practitioners, including the Buddha himself, sometimes they'll make mistakes or they'll go off in the wrong direction and try something thinking this is the way, this is going to work, only later to decide maybe it doesn't work, it's no longer helpful, or it may be counterproductive. Sometimes people, they take on a particular ascetic practice thinking this is it, I'm going to punish myself, or I'm going to burn up all the defilements, I'm going to fast, or I'm going to go without sleep, I'm going to do this, do that. And sometimes they overdo it, only later they realize. Or some people say, I need to develop metta, goodwill, and they end up falling in love with someone. There's a number of dangers, even with bona fide meditation techniques, if one's approach is not a wise approach. So we need to develop wisdom through experience as well. And so teachers and listening to the Dhamma help, but also your own reflection. So meditation, it's a skill. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get back from it. Very wholesome, good karma. Next question. Why is the body awareness and painful feelings suppressed during samadhi? Is it only consciousness present during samadhi? Well, you're conscious of an object. And when we call samadhi one-pointedness or stillness of mind, the mind is not running around after many objects. You just observe what's going on in your day and you'll notice your mind is moving very quickly between seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, and then thinking, remembering, thinking. And that uses up a lot of mental energy, so we get tired, we get distracted, we get caught into all kinds of moods of frustration, disappointment, distractedness, confusion. Because there's many objects the mind is jumping onto or holding onto. So the untrained mind always needs something. We need something to think about. We're always looking for something to think about, good or bad. You notice that in a meditation retreat. Sometimes you kind of get dull, bored, dull, and your mind is just craving any kind of stimulation. If you're being strict, you're not talking to anyone, you're not looking at your phone, doing other things. Your mind, after a while, might really crave stimulation, and the only stimulation you can get is to think. Fantasize, imagine, think. And sometimes even thinking about stuff you don't like or stuff that makes you feel angry is better than nothing. People have that experience in themselves. They'd rather think about something, even if it makes them angry, than just feel bored or dull. That's the mind just craving something. Any object will do, even if it's a miserable, unhappy object. But of course, when you train the mind in samadhi, or we say unifying the mind on its object, you're abandoning the 5 hindrances, which are what normally make up our mental activity. We are wanting something that's desirable through our senses, we're thinking about it, wanting. We are not wanting, we're caught into aversion, irritation. We're drowsy, we're apathetic. We're restless, we're worried, thinking about the past, the future, or we're doubting things, skeptical doubt, the 5 hindrances. But when you put your mind on one object, mindfulness comes up and it's sustained when you through the training, through the practice. So you start dropping the hindrances. That's why you feel more relaxed in body and mind. And little by little, you're letting go of your immediate identification or attachment or concern for the body. So that's the 5 external senses. You're letting them go. You don't need to see because you close your eyes. You're not interested in what you hear, so you're letting go of sounds. You're not eating, you're letting go of taste, smells, you let go of touch. So the mind is kind of withdrawing into itself by focusing on one object, whatever that meditation object may be, to the point where you're letting go of the body. And that includes feelings. So when your mind becomes one-pointed, you get an escape or a rest from painful feelings and sensations and itches and all the stuff that your body is normally bringing up into consciousness. That all is gone. So if you attain a state of samadhi, one-pointedness, you can maybe sustain it for a long time because you are not in pain. And it brightens the mind, energizes the mind, you go beyond sleepiness. So if you become skilled in samadhi, you can go without sleep for periods of time. You can cope with pain and discomfort because you also have a place you can go where you don't have to experience that pain and discomfort. You've seen its temporary nature. Of course, samadhi is temporary, so you will have to return back to your experiencing your body normally and then the pain that comes with that. But you do get a rest, and it helps in developing insight into, say, the impermanent nature of feeling. But the number one quality you are aiming for is sati, mindfulness, energy, effort, And when these qualities are present, well, samadhi arises. In the beginning you may train yourself in one particular object, such as the breath, for example. But of course we're also aiming to uproot greed, anger and delusion, all the mental defilements. So samadhi has a purpose, it's not an end in itself. The purpose is to steady the mind, unify the mind, so then you can reflect and see the impermanence of body, feelings, thoughts, sense consciousness. See them as impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self. These witness and observe these three characteristics in your experience. So samadhi is a platform or a vehicle from where you can reflect or contemplate on your experience. That's the role of samadhi. So remember that, it's not an end in itself. It's a way of training the mind so then you can develop clear knowledge and vision of the way things are, because your mind is steady. When your mind is shaky, much of the time our mind is shaky, isn't it? We're moving around with thoughts and sights and this and that. It's hard to really catch the subtle defilements of mind. We can catch some more coarser, obvious ones, but some of the subtle ones we miss because the mind is moving too much. So that's why we need to develop mindfulness, make it strong, continuous. Next question is from Singapore. Lumpur, I am a workaholic. During my morning meditation, my mind is filled with a lot of thoughts and work reminders for the day. It's hard to shut them out of my mind. They come naturally. Yeah, well, that makes sense. If you work most days of the week and you have to think about your work and prepare things and plan things and decide things, that's a big conditioning force in your life. So when you sit down to meditate, it's all going to come up. Of course it is. So you have to learn to manage that. So that's why a regular meditation practice helps, because you may become more familiar with temporarily putting down your thoughts about work by developing a meditation object on a regular basis. So if you do it regularly, you start reflecting on all these thoughts about work, and you may start to trust yourself to let them go during your meditation. So I don't need to think about work during my meditation. So that's a skill that you're developing, the ability to pick up and think about work and then put it down again. And mindfulness practice, meditation practice will help you do that. You know, it's understandable you think about work because that's what you normally are thinking about. Your mind is full of it, all the memories and then all the plans and expectations for the future. But you can train yourself, at least temporarily, to put it aside by developing a meditation object. And we have to do that, we have to learn how to do that. So you're not carrying around all the stuff from your work all the time. You have to give your mind a rest, a break sometimes. So that's why you can develop the breath. And you have to trust that you can do that, and it's not going to make your work worse. Your work is not going to suffer by temporarily setting it aside, setting the thoughts about work aside. It means you're refreshing your mind so you can go back and do a better job. Look at your work with a clear head, understand it from the place of Dhamma. Your work is still impermanent, it's still unsatisfactory, it's still not self. But normally you don't see that because your mind is so attached and caught up in it. But if you meditate, maybe you can step back to a more detached awareness and then look back at your work with the eye of Dhamma. That may help you to do that job with more detachment. So working but without attachment. This is something, even monks are learning, because monks, you still have things you do, tasks you do, activities like learning, chanting and sewing and cleaning the monastery and building things and doing this and teaching and so on. anyone in this world, even a monk who's living in the forest, will still have a certain number of activities they have to do in their day. You have to eat food, you have to wear clothing, robes, whatever. So you also have to learn how to manage thoughts about all these different activities. So the first thing is to practice mindfulness, then also see the value of introducing the factors of the path into your work and the way you look at your work. So you're trying to keep precepts, practice right speech, right action, right livelihood as you work will help. Practice mindfulness of the work that you do. So try to work mindfully, abandoning unwholesome dhammas that arise that you notice during the course of your day. You get angry or irritated when you're tired or when things go wrong, dealing with people who sometimes are not helpful or cooperative. You'll get your own emotional reactions to things, so you start introducing the Dhamma, how you deal with all that. Practicing kindness and compassion where it's appropriate, maybe. So actually incorporating the Dhamma and applying the Dhamma to your work will help with this whole thing. So that you're not seeing work as an enemy of your meditation or something separate, but merely introducing aspects of meditation into your daily life, into your work. Of course, in meditation there'll be times when you do have to just drop everything. That's a skill, but it will take time, so you work at it. Work on improving your mindfulness, your ability to concentrate. And then there's other times when you need to reflect on your work. So you have thoughts come out, are those thoughts wholesome or not? And if you have to plan something about your job, well, maybe that's something you have to do. So there's a time and place for it. When you have to plan, you plan, but observe whether you're getting caught into greed or being unreasonable. So a lot of this is what we call giving reasoned reflection, yoniso manasikara, applying it to the things you're involved with in your life, like work, like how you earn your money, how you spend your money, how you relate to other people. You know, all of this we can apply wise reflection to, and wise reflection is supported by mindfulness, and then training the mind to consider things in terms of Dhamma. You know, whether you're keeping precepts or not, whether the mental states you're involved with are skillful and wholesome or not. This takes wise reflection. So even your work can become a basis for wise reflection, mindfulness practice. You know, when you're actually meditating on the breath, of course, you're practicing setting aside thoughts of work so you can focus on the breath. But at other times, you can make the work you're doing the object of your meditation. So you go to work and you have to type at a computer or do a task or have a meeting with someone. There are these various activities you're doing with your work, and you can try and introduce mindfulness as you do those activities. You know, if you're doing a job of work, how easily are you distracted from that job? How often does your mind wander away to think about other things? You can make your job of work a practice of mindfulness too. So, nothing wrong with being a workaholic. Many monks were formerly workaholics and then they became enlightened because they worked so hard, and then they turned that energy to the practice of developing sila, samadhi, panya. So don't worry about being a workaholic, but try and turn that energy to the Dhamma rather than just following greed, anger and delusion. Finally, you need patience. Be patient with the fact that you're a workaholic. You know, get to know yourself and accept yourself. Be patient with that, and then see how you can use your strengths to support Dhamma practice. You know, you can do a job of work and be in samadhi. You may not be in jhana because that requires stillness of body, but you could be in what we call upajjhara samadhi when you're working. For somebody who's trained, they can do that. So, I know many monks who have trained themselves to do building projects or administration or certain tasks in the monastery which involve a certain amount of activity, using thought, using the body in different ways, but they can maintain their state of samadhi. And they're going beyond the hindrances as they do that. It's not impossible. And you can build a meditation hall or oversee that project in samadhi. As I say, it may not be the deepest level of stillness in samadhi, but it's a level where the hindrances are gone and the mind is just focused on that job. So the mind is wholesome, happy, content, without hindrances as the monk does that job. So it's possible. Further part of that question was, I also realized that some of the thoughts are mental proliferation on the past or positive evaluations which reinforce my ego. How do I abandon and uproot this kilesa? Well, this is more developing vipassana and the wisdom aspect. So as you do your job, your work, your tasks, reflect. These are impermanent. You are impermanent. One day you will not be here. Your life is subject to aging, sickness and death, as we just chanted. The people you're involved with, one day they won't be there. They die, they get old, sick and die. And before you die, you retire anyway, or you move jobs. The things you're involved with, the material things, the activities are all impermanent. What's impermanent is unsatisfactory, cannot bring you lasting happiness because it's impermanent. The money you earn, the praise you gain, the sense of feelings of accomplishment you gain from work are all impermanent. So reflect on that. What's impermanent is not self, because it's impermanent. One moment it's there and then it's gone. It's not that there's nothing there, but this thing we call a self is a fluid process of causes and conditions. There's nothing certain, there's nothing solid in that. And that's a reflection to keep bringing up as you work. So as you notice the ego arising, maybe you're in a supervisory role and you have to tell people what to do and they don't do what you want, or they disagree, or they don't cooperate. Reflect on the greed, the anger that may be stimulated by that situation. To see the suffering of clinging to the sense of self. The feedback you get, the praise, the blame, the success, the failure, this is part of life and it comes up in work and in other aspects of life, of course. But you have to learn how to reflect to see the impermanence and not self in these experiences. So you're working as if there's no one there. That's your ultimate goal. You're working without the sense of self. So the work is just work. You focus on the work itself, doing the best job you can with mindfully, honestly, with good intention, with right effort, and then you let go. When the kilesas come into our work, we tend to be focusing on what we're going to get from it. I want to be rich, I want to be successful, I want people to recognize how good I am and be famous and well known, etc., etc. None of that is going to bring you ultimate happiness. All of that is delusion that will lead you to suffering. And we're always thinking about what other people think of us and how much money and wealth we've got and how can I get a bit more, how can I get on, how can I get ahead. So you have to separate that grasping and greed that comes into your thinking. So you can still do a good job, but then let go of the grasping and the greed that may form around that. So if you're in a monastery, sweeping is just sweeping, sowing is just sowing, chanting is just chanting, chopping wood is just chopping wood. You're letting go of that desire to be the best wood chopper in the monastery. If you can chop wood well, good. It's a great service to the community. We all need firewood in the winter. But you don't have to be the best chopper or the worst chopper. You just do what you can with your skills. You don't have to be the best leaf sweeper or leaf blower. You just do the job, but you don't have to get too much self involved with it. You try and do it well, but then you let go of the sense of self. You know, in Thailand there's the beautiful image of sticking gold leaf on the back of the Buddha. So you're doing something good, you're worshipping the Buddha by sticking gold leaf, but you're doing it on the back where no one will see your gold leaf. It's that idea that you don't have to introduce conceit and self into the job you do. You're not doing it to impress others. You're just doing it because it's the right job to do, it's a good job to do, it's a service, it's needed. But you let go of the sense of self as you do it. You don't have to promote yourself. So sticking gold leaf on the back of the Buddha is like that. Nobody sees. So many things we do in life, nobody will know that we do them, except for us. But that doesn't matter, because we're not doing it to impress others. Nibbana is not something you have to boast about or tell the world about. I've reached Nibbana. Because there's no sense of self left when you reach Nibbana. So if you're still thinking in that way, I've got to tell everyone, and you're constantly reacting to the praise and blame of others and the recognition or lack of recognition, then you're not close to Nibbana, are you? The sense of self is guiding you, and you'll suffer a lot. We have this way in a monastery. Sometimes you do a job, like you do a lot of jobs in a monastery that are repetitive. Like you clean the hall over and over again. You sweep a path over and over again. So occasionally when you, particularly if you're, say, a new member of the community, you might be given a job and you do it. You clean the toilets, you clean the path. That's good. Then someone may come along and say, can you clean the path? You say, well, I just did it. Doesn't matter, you just do it again, it's still a good job. If you're practicing with the right attitude, sometimes you can do the same job over and over again, even when you've done it already, as you know you've done it. Someone says, can you do that job? You say, well, I've done it. And they say, do it again. Okay, you can do it, because you're doing it without self. The way of the world is always, cutting corners, saving time, saving costs. So, you're always trying to do the minimum. So then you can get on and do something else that you enjoy more, maybe. When you're practicing Dhamma, maybe a very boring, repetitive job doesn't matter. You can just keep doing it, because you're practicing mindfulness, and mindfulness is not always moving on to the next thing. It's being mindful of what you're doing right now. So your attitude changes a bit when you work in a monastery. You're working for free. You're just doing it as part of your training and as a service for others. And that's the danger in the world, is because we tend to be working for money, for career, for praise, for success. So of course it stimulates a lot of greed and attachment. And that's what we have to keep reflecting on, and use the reflection on impermanence, not self. That's why we practice dana, give it away. Earn the money and then support your family and then give the rest away if you can. Next question from Singapore. It's got a title. That means it's going to be a long question. Questions with titles are like an essay, my life essay. So title is Karma in Siblings in the Family. If all things are causes and conditions, if I am the only one practicing Buddha Dhamma in my family, and to be myself, be at ease within, how may I practice on myself? If this lifetime we happen to be blood siblings, and despite my efforts to be caring towards them, it seems one-sided. My relationship with siblings is distant, and I have accepted the reality that they still come up in my mind when I practice metta. Why? When we accept the wisdom in this, we can begin to forgive, grow and move along peace in oneself. If I still suffer because I can't feel her love for me, then to practice to free myself from this attachment style, I have to look inwards. I'm aware there is a longing for sisterhood, genuine care from her, which I don't have at the moment. Can you help me understand karma amongst blood siblings and how to start to cultivate in myself? Metta practice is helping some. Please continue to guide me, Ajahn. This seems to come up all the time, doesn't it? Problems with family, siblings, brothers, sisters, parents, husband and wife, parents and children. It's not easy to live with other people. We all have our own karma, our own attachments, desires. And like you say, often the people around us are not Buddhists or not practicing Buddhism. They don't understand or know much about it. Therefore, if you do have faith in the Buddha and his teachings and you see the value of it, keep coming back to your own practice for now. Let them work it out for themselves. Don't waste too much time on them because they've got to learn these things for themselves. Maybe you're not the one to tell them. So focus mostly on yourself, finding your own inner peace, like you say, through cultivating the practice of sila, precepts, discipline in your speech, your actions, so you're not hurting others, patience with others who cause us trouble, and like you say, cultivate the metta in your meditation and your daily life. That will bring you a lot of peace and inner sense of well-being. And just see what's important, what are your priorities. So like in a family, your parents are your priorities. See what you can do to give something back to them, help them, support them, even if you feel they haven't loved you enough. Doesn't matter. Just keep helping them in whatever way you can. Material help and then spiritual help. If you can get them to hear the Dhamma, practice charity, generosity in any way, that will be good. Siblings is the same, but the connection is going to be weaker than with your parents, so how successful you can be, you have to be very patient. Maybe if you keep practicing yourself, eventually you'll find opportunities where you can encourage your siblings to practice as well. Maybe if they see how you're benefiting from your practice, they may be inspired or interested because of that. When they're maybe being unfair to you, but you don't react with anger, you're patient, you're kind, maybe that can win them over time. Like you say, you have to practice forgiveness, because if you can't forgive, what does it mean? It means you're holding on to anger in your own heart over and over again. You're suffering. So really, forgiveness is the only way. And doesn't mean to say you're approving of what they've done if they behave wrongly, badly, but there's no point holding on to anger in your heart. So let it go, whatever they've done, let it go. And you have to protect yourself as well, so sometimes you have to find ways, skillful ways to look after yourself, but don't dwell in anger, because you're just making their bad behavior, if that's what they're doing, their bad behavior becomes a cause for your unhappiness. So you're poisoning your own mind by holding on to memories and aversion towards siblings or parents. So everyone will have this in one way or another. Sometimes it's work, colleagues, neighbours, people you're associated with, sometimes it's family. We have to keep coming back to ourselves, working on our own mind, our own reactions of anger, our own frustrations, disappointments. Your aim is always to practice right effort, cultivate wholesome states of mind and abandon unwholesome states of mind. So even if someone else is behaving unfairly, unkindly, if you're caught into anger, disappointment, all the more negative thoughts, the way to free yourself from that is by working on your own mind, cultivating mindfulness and awareness and letting that go, seeing it as impermanent, as not self. You can't wait for them to change, because they may never change in one lifetime. Some people don't really change very much, unfortunately. But you can change. If you're a student of the Buddha, you see the value and the potential of change within you. That's why you're following the Buddha, I would imagine. Therefore, come back to yourself and work on yourself first, because that's where you can affect some real change. And if this can help the people around you, good. If it can't, well, you just have to put up with it. And maybe minimize your contact with ones who are out to harm you or compete with you. Unfortunately, siblings can behave like strangers. They can be angry with you, they can bully you, they can take advantage of you in every way. It's possible. So sometimes you have to protect yourself. If it's more ordinary, on an ordinary level, they just don't care about you enough in the way they speak, in the way they act. Sometimes you just have to put up with it. There's nothing much you can do, but it's not really hurting you much. You just keep mindful, let go of your own frustrations, move on yourself. And they're going to have to work it out for themselves in the long run. Always remember, if someone else is behaving badly, they're going to receive the karma from that. They're going to be unhappy in the future. You don't have to go and do anything to hurt them. They're hurting themselves. So the correct response is one of compassion. You're not agreeing with what they're doing, but what you are doing is recognizing they're making negative karma, which will hurt themselves in the now and in the future. So you should feel compassion for them, rather than going with anger or hatred. So it was a fairly general question, so fairly general answer. But just be patient, keep coming back to the Dhamma, practicing what the Buddha taught, and I'm sure your life will improve and your relationships with others will improve too. So I think that's the last question for tonight. So I'll end the session there.